The study of genetics has changed our understanding of inherent traits. Before Gregor Mendel performed his experiments on common pea plants in the 1800s, it was well understood that aspects of the father and the mother were passed down to the child they had together. Most notable being facial features, body structures, kinds of eyes, hair, and skin, and occasionally congenital and inherent disorders. This is noted and taken further by biologists like Charles Darwin and Robert Chambers, who saw how some animals in the fossil records were broadly similar to others, strongly implying familial relationships, similar to recognizing cousins by facial features. I've seen similar things in cousins myself. The mixing of blood and later the blending of genes was only a broad explanation. However, it was the discovery of DNA being the carrier of genetic information that reshaped our understanding of the field and gave us new ways to analyse the remains of humans and animals. DNA testing has become a staple of forensics, paternity tests, and some areas of paleontology. It is an amazing area of science, and was accepted by creationist community to prove who's related to whom, understanding how it explains evolution is such a tricky concept for them. One famous apologist says how our failed experiments of genetic manipulation proves that it can't be the case. However, I think not only does it prove otherwise, but I also think the Bible tells us why. I'll explain if I can. And for those of you watching this from an atheist perspective, yes, this is primarily aimed at theists who struggle to understand evolution and genetics. So, if you're interested, stick around, because this might help you guys explain it in a more liberal way, rather than bashing them with a hammer, which is interestingly not too far off from where it's going. So where in the Bible does it start off? Well, let's start with Leviticus 19:19. Keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two different kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two different kinds of material. This instantly raises questions about what is meant by kind. An article on answeringgenesis.org basically concludes that kind means species. When this is applied to scientific subdivisions of the tree of life, this is the last branching section. So, a dog, for example, is a species within the genus Canis and the family Canidae. Does this mean that God wants us to keep things within the species? Dogs only with dogs? I think yes. And I feel there's living proof of this out there. And I can actually show you it. When we think of crossbreeds outside of kinds, we think hybrids like mules, the male donkey mating with a female horse, hinnies, the other way around, ligers, a male lion mating with a female tiger, and tigons, vice versa, both of which are sterile. Since donkeys and horses are of the same genus, Equidae, but not the same species, this implies that kind certainly means species, though the earliest record of a hybrid of a wild ass and a domestic donkey, both of the species Africanus, imply that the Kunga was also infertile. When examining many other hybrids, one thing stands out apart from the majority of them being sterile. They are all closely related taxonomically. No dog-cat hybrids, no bear-seal hybrids. They only occur within genuses. The famous apologist Frank Turek claimed that two great examples of genetic barriers precludes evolution. First, trying to turn a fruit fly into a housefly. This only produced, at best, a mutant fruit fly. Why? Well, they are completely different families on the tree of life. Both are of the order Diptera, but fruit flies, and I'm going to butcher these, I know, we should practice, but fruit flies are of the family Drosophilinae, and houseflies are Mercendia, or something like that, which is like turning a dog into a bear. It's not that easy with brute force. The other example is, despite our centuries of breeding dogs, we've never been able to make anything like a cat. If I had the chance to ask him what he meant by that, I would do so with alacrity, because if he means something that is genetically identical to a cat, then certainly we don't have a single chance of doing that. The whole reason DNA is useful in identifying individuals, or at least determining if someone is related, is because they are unique and highly variable. The only way in which this idea works is essentially implant a cat embryo into a dog and claim successful breeding, which no one would believe and is easily disproved, assuming it was possible in the first place. If he means something that looks or acts like a cat, then we may have a chance, but only in certain aspects, like the body shape, the fur, the attitude, and general behaviour. The features we commonly associate with cats, retractable claws, balancing tails, grooming tongues, won't be achievable unless highly specialised breeding is put in place over thousands of years. And I think that's one thing that we keep forgetting. Dogs have been bred for certain things. Cats filled the gaps that dogs didn't always fill. The time they were put in that same niche was with the terriers going after rats. That's because cats found it easier to go for birds. Interesting enough, though, in nature there are creatures that have some features we link with dogs and cats, but are closely related to the other in taxonomy. Members of the Feliformes suborder show aspects we would associate with dogs. The first and most classic example that we can come up with is the hyena, which many would think is a close relative of dogs, but is actually of the Aluridae clade, which includes cats, but not dogs. Another is the meerkat, a relative of the mongoose, which has a pack-like mentality and even digs for its food. Very dog-like behaviour, but still closely related to cats. To bring it home with a more relatable creature, the savannah cat is most definitely a feline, but has been noted by experts to act very much like a dog. What about caniforms? Well, whilst there are a few examples of tree-climbing dogs, many domestic and wild breeds can jump into trees. Red foxes are known for scaling alarming heights in the escape of predators or hunting prey, and have been recorded jumping from branch to branch. Grey foxes in particular have feline adaptations such as retracting claws and balancing tails. Other caniforms, such as raccoons, martens and bears, also have members who climb very well, and the mustelids in particular are ferocious predators. In short, unless we can define exactly what we mean by a dog or a cat, we can't say that one can't become the other by breeding. To make this point about blending species, I have to turn to the other forbidden mixes in Leviticus, that of crops. This could be to prevent competition between plants and making it near impossible for one to be more sufficient in growing the harvest, avoiding damaging crop yields or even leaching nutrients from the soil, making planting the field very hard and causing desertification. But since I'm looking at genetics, I'm going to quote something from musical comedy duo Flanders and Swan. Their song Misalliance tells the difference between two climbing plants who fell in love, the honeysuckle and the bindweed. After a quick search, I found that whilst they are both of the order Astradis, the clockwise climbing honeysuckle is of the order Dipscelius, and the anti-clockwise bindweed is Solanatus, Solenales. I don't know. I'm not good with Latin. The line that makes the best explanation of the issue goes something like this. A bee who was passing remarked to them then, "I'll say it before, and I'll say it again. Consider your offshoots, if offshoots there be. They will never receive any blessing from me. Poor little sucker, how will it learn, when it is climbing, which way to turn? Right, left, what a disgrace! Where it may go straight up and fall flat on its face." Quite apart from the fact that such cross-fertilisation is impossible, it highlights that when species have opposite adaptations, it becomes harder to make them crossbreed without negative effects. So, where does this leave us? Well, it proves that the majority of experiments where we are trying to make one creature into another fail for two reasons. First, we don't clarify what we are trying to achieve with them. And second, because we have been trying to brute force them rather than cultivate them over a long time. Does this mean evolution is wrong? No, and the evidence to support it is clear in multiple places around the world. Even if a creature has its place in the world, its own habitat and ecological niche, why aren't they entirely universal? Before we say Noah's Ark, if literally every animal was to come onto the Ark in such a short time, across the seas, at that time that would have lacked land bridges, God would have brought them back. And odds are, would have sent them back at about the same means, I reckon. However, there are animals that fill niches that otherwise would have been left empty by the animals we'd expect. Looking very similar, but are in fact completely unrelated. The examples I'm thinking of are the hedgehog, other shrews, and the tenrec. Hedgehogs, shrews, and moles are all of the order, I'm going to butcher this one I know, Eulepoptrophila. Something like that. One of the basal clades of placental mammals, and fill many niches of small insectivore. Whilst they are widespread and can be found in many land masses across the globe, one place doesn't have any of their order whatsoever: Madagascar. Instead, it has its own roster of creatures to fill the same hole in the ecosystem: the tenrec. Tenrecs are technically not a single species, but a broad family of animals, with the simple shrew-like body plan, which is highly adaptable and can, without much adjustment, be suited to many ecological niches that would otherwise be filled with mice, hedgehogs, opossums, and shrews. All this was being more related to elephants, aardvarks, and manatees than any other mammal, all being of the superorder Afrophea. It's a fine example of convergent evolution, where two completely separate species develop similar adaptations for the same problem. In humans, we say great minds think alike. Other examples exist on Australia and New Zealand, as well as other island groups across the seas, but Madagascar is the best example I can find. Could God have gotten bored with making animals like the hedgehog and decided to do tenrecs? I'm not sure if his patience was that short, and if it was, we would have been destroyed centuries ago. And I'm not just referring to the flood, we would have been gone long after that. Finally, recent studies have shown the recently extinct Steller sea cow to have similar genetic mutations to modern whales, showing that when genetics are convergent, the results in different animals. This is particularly interesting considering the whales are more related to actual cows, whilst the Steller sea cow, like all manatees, are close relatives to elephants. This makes for interesting thinking.
And for those of you who still don't think dogs and wolves are related, let me first start with some images of dogs. Okay. So we got everything from a French bulldog all the way up to an Irish wolfhound, Great Dane, German Shepherd, Labrador, your standard poodle. You can see the vast differences, and in fact some people think the Chihuahua is actually a breed of rat rather than any type of dog. What about animals that could have been closely related to them, like the wolf? So let's think, the Arabian wolf. Arabian dogs, let's see. Nice long-limbed creatures, they're beautiful, aren't they? What about the Arabian wolf? Looks more like a jackal, doesn't it? But you bear in mind the early dogs, so early dog breeds. Early dog breeds. Just the profile alone looks very much like it. Add on later breeds, like say Diddle-a-dare, what was back out. Here's one. Pomeranians, Corgis, English Greyhound. Dogs are bred from a wide variety of animals. The grey wolf, traditionally common ancestor. But believe me, I've got a golden retriever. Some friends of mine have a Gekoni. My boss has both a couple of spaniels, cockers, and a boxer. There's plenty of creatures. Now they're showing you just how different they are. These are based, you can see how many of them are mentioned as terriers, and yet do you think they seem vaguely the same? Is their size? They are essentially a broad species of animal. within themselves, there's no reason to believe they can't be descended from the wolf. And if you think then, for any reason, they are examples of microevolution, if there's that much difference between a pug and a Belgian Malinois, which I'll bring up right now. Let me see. Scroll back to. Get the way you. Belgium. Malinois. Belgian Malinois. Yeah. The difference between a Belgian Malinois and a pug is startling. And they look almost identical to wolves. Don't get me started on things like the Alaskan Malamute or even the Husky. There are wolf dogs out there. They can quite easily breed. Yeah, this one's basically a wolf right here. Some people might even forget about a very particular animal. There's most certainly a descendant of a domesticated dog they're very much now pest and very much feral in Australia. The dingo. Let's see. Dingo history. Dingoes are Australia's breed of wild dog. These are ancient breed domestic dog brought in. Was introduced to Australia probably by Asian seafarers. As you can see, basically dingoes are the prime example of how animals can go back. We say it's probably a thylacine. It's only the thylacine. That thing in a pouch. That's a dingo.
Now, I'm very aware that some studies imply that evolution is mathematically impossible due to the unlikelihood of beneficial mutations occurring and being passed on to others. However, evolution doesn't always work by mutations happening to be beneficial. Sometimes mutations are already in the gene pool, giving creatures an edge when the environment changes. Using examples found in the fossil record isn't going to be accepted, but I don't need to look back that far. Many examples of human environmental changes causing so-called accelerated evolution exist. Swallows with shorter wingspan, plastic-eating microbes, tuskless elephants are examples of this. In a video I shall link below. One of the ones I'm going to talk about is actually from an event in the last 40 years or so. So within the lifetime of many people. In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant melted down and bathed the entire area in radiation that would make living there long-term hazardous. And yet many animals have survived there. I know there's a gross simplification of what happened, and I need to pass you over to Carl Hill, a science communicator, to fully explain exactly what happened with Chernobyl and all of that, and radiation and that lot, but that's a very basic form, because I'm not a nuclear physicist. But the radiation has not been too bad. Pet dogs have gone feral and interbred to make a beautiful mix of mutts. Though none of them glow in the dark, the animal I'm going to mention has gone the other way. The local population of eastern tree frogs has gone from their normal bright green colour to a much darker tone, even going pitch black in some cases. This is due to an increase in melanin, the pigment responsible for darker skin tones. This is well known to protect against radiation. In humans, it's noted to protect against UV. Clearly, in this form of microevolution, observable over 40 years, this has worked well for frogs. I've not been able to pin down the exact age or sexual maturity for frogs, but even assuming it's less than a year old, there's a small enough time to show that it's not mutation alone, but environmental change that has led to less of a hazard to darker skinned frogs. Radiation causing mutations is a tricky subject to tackle, but it does make a good example of response or cause that tends to crop up in some Old Testament discussions. If none of that convinces you, I think there's a passage that gives us a hint that evolution is proven by the Bible. The passages I'm referring to are Mark 11:12-14 and Matthew 21 verses 18 to 22, which many of you will know as the time that Jesus cursed a fig tree. Now, many people have disparaged this verse as proving Jesus was spoiled, ignorant, and should have known that at the time of year, figs weren't in season. But anyone who grows figs will tell you that when good fig trees are in leaf, they will already have little figs growing. They won't be harvested for a good few months, but at that time they are still good to eat. I came across a video quite a while ago of a pastor's sermon on this topic, where he acknowledged the tree was out of season, but he said the tree should have still been able to produce figs for Jesus, because he was God incarnate. He uses it to illustrate us needing to act when God tells us to, and not when we decide, which is a good point to make. But saying the tree chose not to respond to the will of Jesus as Emmanuel suggests to me that the tree had the capacity for free will. I've not been able to find that video since. I've never gotten the name of that pastor, so I can't have any guarantee that he knew what he was talking about, or indeed find any other pastor who gave a similar sermon. But it does make for an interesting suggestion, and leads to an interesting point. You may have guessed it already. The fact that animals, great and small, throughout the Bible, have responded to God's will, and the tree can deny God's will, implies that in some sense that free will is given to all living things. Granted, this is a gross oversimplification of evolution, and anyone who seriously studies it will be eating their pencils at this, but if plants can choose to respond to God, why not bacteria or even single cells? This implies that creatures of all size and shapes can respond to God's will or reject it and grow in their own way, creating the shapes we know today. Yes, this is an argument to persuade the fundamentalists, and so anyone who seriously studies evolution is welcome to disregard this. But does it show? It certainly does show the Bible doesn't stand against the changing of animals in any way, shape or form. but in fact implies otherwise, if tangentially, and by a sermon given by one pastor who's eluded my best searches. Despite what apologists say about genetics disproving evolution, among other things, the Bible points out on multiple occasions the reasons why their understanding is wrong, and furthermore pointing out that nothing stands in the way of life changing according to its own whims, or even rejecting God to do its own thing. Ultimately, evolution is a gateway to understanding the complexity of life, and further understanding how God's creations work. To say God is merely filling the gaps is like saying that we're only eating bread between meals, when you don't see between the slices into the sandwich. We can understand the world better if we look in the different ways, which is something that everyone, no matter what their position on God or religion of any kind, can learn from. So keep an open mind. Stay humble. Stay safe. And God be with you.